In the final months of World War II, as Europe lay in ruins and empires collapsed under the weight of their secrets, new wars were already being born. Quiet, invisible wars fought in archives, in basements, in the gaps of erased records. Beneath the surface of official history, convoys vanished without trace, submarines sent messages that no one claimed, and scientists changed flags faster than their uniforms. The victors wrote the headlines, but the losers wrote the classified files. What remains today are fragments, decrypted cables, burned manifests, intercepted transmissions, all pointing to the same conclusion. Not everything that ended in 1945 was meant to stay buried. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Wintermute. In February 1945, as the Third Reich crumbled and the front lines shrank toward Berlin, a small convoy rolled out from a facility in the Harz Mountains under orders stamped Sondertransport, Kammlergruppe. 6 Opel Blitz trucks, escorted by SS personnel of the 6th Technical Detachment, carried unmarked wooden crates. According to a surviving dispatch from the Reich Main Security Office dated 18th of February, the convoy's destination was Oberammergau, in the Bavarian Alps. The transport was logged as technical equipment bound for the Forschungsstelle Süd, a research site administered by the SS's Development Division. 2 days later, it vanished. What followed was not a typical wartime disappearance. Field reports from American intercept units later noted unusual radio silence from the region around Mittenwald between 20 and 22 February. No Luftwaffe patrols, no Wehrmacht communications, and curiously, no Allied reconnaissance photographs from those specific dates survived in the post-war archives. When the US 7th Army entered the area in May, the road was found half collapsed by artillery damage. In a ditch along the route, soldiers recovered British-manufactured fuel drums marked RAF Pol, January 1945. Why they were there, hundreds of kilometers inside German territory, was never explained. Decades later, in 1973, declassified fragments from OSS Archive 12447 made reference to a mission codenamed Operation Wintermute. The file contained only one intact memorandum from Colonel Nathaniel Cole, dated April 1945, stating that priority materials associated with Kammler's advanced propulsion work have been sighted in transit southward under SS. Guard. Cole's memo was stamped Eyes Only. Project Horizon Liaison, an early post-war intelligence division investigating captured Axis technology. The rest of the pages were blacked out. What survived suggested that the Americans had known about the convoy and may even have been tracking it. By 1946, Soviet counterintelligence in Berlin had opened their own inquiry. The NKVD's recovered German personnel files listed an SS officer named Hauptsturmführer Friedrich Maurer as the convoy's security commander. His records ended abruptly on 23 February 1945. Maurer's family later received notification of death in transit due to enemy action, though no unit or engagement was specified. An NKVD summary report, filed under Dossier 7327, Harz Anomalien, claimed that at least 2 Soviet agents embedded in the German railway system had reported significant material movement from Nordhausen, home to the Mittelwerk facility that built the V-2 rocket, days before the convoy's disappearance. Witnesses described heavy crates emitting a continuous low-frequency vibration. A retired American intelligence officer, interviewed anonymously in 1981, claimed that portions of the Wintermute cargo were recovered under different circumstances. He referenced a US Army engineering site established in 1948 above Mittenwald, operating under NATO's Technical Command West. The official cover story was geological surveying, but the base, known to locals as the listening station, was heavily guarded and off-limits for decades. When the site was quietly decommissioned in 1972, its inventory logs were destroyed. Only one transfer record remained, listing 6 sealed steel containers, unidentified origin, magnetic interference present. The involvement of Dr. Hans Kammler, the SS general responsible for many of the Reich's secret weapons projects, cannot be ignored. Kammler disappeared in early May 1945. His body was never found. Allied reports conflict. Some claim he committed suicide near Prague. Others that he was captured by the Americans and given a new identity under Operation Paperclip. What links him to Wintermute is a single signature found on a surviving requisition form dated 10th of February authorizing transport of prototype energy modules to southern containment. The document bears Kammler's initials and the seal of the Entwicklungsstab Kammler, the same division overseeing V2 development and experimental propulsion research in the Harz region. There were other traces. In 1955, a Bavarian forestry worker uncovered rusted vehicle fragments and twisted metal along an overgrown logging road near the Austrian border. Forensic tests identified the steel as pre-1945 German manufacture, but no military insignia remained. Locals whispered about haunted trucks seen moving without lights on foggy nights that winter. Most dismissed it as folklore, until a US Army patrol unit reportedly sealed off the site within 24 hours. Their vehicles bore the insignia of the 97th Signal Battalion, not the engineers, and they were accompanied by 2 civilians carrying camera cases and radiation dosimeters. A 1998 excavation, led by a private research foundation, attempted to locate remnants of the Wintermute convoy. Their geophysical scans revealed a subterranean anomaly approximately 60 meters below a collapsed ridge. Before any digging began, Bavarian state authorities revoked the team's permit, citing unexploded ordnance hazards. The area was reclassified as a restricted heritage zone. When pressed, officials referred to unresolved NATO security agreements dating from the early Cold War. No further exploration has been allowed since. From the scattered evidence, a pattern emerges: advanced experimental cargo originating from Kammler's division, disappearance en route to the Bavarian Alps, subsequent Allied and Soviet intelligence interference, and the establishment of a restricted NATO installation over the same ground. Whatever was inside those 6 trucks was significant enough to survive 3 regimes and remain sealed under military classification for nearly 8 decades. Some historians argue that the convoy carried nothing more than components of the V2 program, blueprints, gyro assemblies, perhaps incomplete rockets, but others point to the anomalous references in Allied intelligence correspondence describing gravitic containment and field resonance phenomena, terms that would not enter mainstream physics for decades. A declassified British file from 1946 even listed Kammler's work alongside recovered Italian and Japanese propulsion research under a heading labeled Non-Conventional Energy Applications. The documents offer no clear definition, only the repeated warning, handle materials with electromagnetic precaution. In 2003, when portions of the US Army's Cold War archive were digitized, researchers noticed a curious entry in an equipment manifest from Mittenwald Station: power cell units, type WNMT-45. The abbreviation matched none of the standard military catalogue codes. 2 years later, the entry was quietly deleted from the public record. Requests for clarification were denied under Section 130 of the National Defense Exemptions Act, citing foreign origin technologies. For those who study wartime logistics, Operation Wintermute is a ghost trail. Every attempt to reconstruct its route ends in contradictions. Rail lines that were never completed, supply roads that do not exist on maps, convoy rosters with repeating serial numbers. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that someone, either during or after the war, deliberately obscured the paper trail. The destruction of related Kammler documents in 1949, just as the newly formed West German government took control of its archives, suggests coordination at the highest levels. There are whispers among retired NATO analysts that the lost convoy was not lost at all but absorbed, that the crates reached their destination and that research continued, not under the swastika, but under the banner of new alliances. One fragmentary cable from 1951, sent between NATO Command Europe and the Pentagon, reads, "Wintermute assets secured. Integration into Horizon Phase 2 ongoing. Further dissemination restricted to Tier Omega clearance." To this day, no one has identified what Phase 2 entailed. What began as a logistical footnote at the end of a dying war has become one of the most persistent unsolved cases in military history. Every decade brings new rumors: a sealed vault in the Alps, strange readings from Cold War bunkers, the faint hum of dormant machinery under the stone. Whether those 6 trucks ever reached their destination or were swallowed by the chaos of retreat remains unknown. Yet the silence surrounding them speaks louder than any official denial. Somewhere in the archives of 2 nations lies the rest of the story, filed away under a codename that still resists declassification: Wintermute. Chapter 2: Ghost Station, the silence of K-43. In March 1952, at the height of post-war paranoia, Soviet submarine K-43 slipped beneath the ice of the Baltic Sea under orders marked Osobaya Zadacha, Special Assignment. The vessel, a Project 613 Whiskey-class diesel-electric submarine, departed from Kronstadt with a skeleton crew and sealed orders delivered personally by a representative of the First Chief Directorate. According to the deployment logs later recovered, the K-43's objective was not patrol or reconnaissance. It was instrument recovery in a grid near the island of Gotland, a region of cold, dark water, where German U-boats had once gone to die. Officially, the submarine never returned. Moscow's report, issued on 7 April 1952, declared the loss due to technical malfunction resulting in catastrophic flooding. The crew of 41 was listed as missing in action. No wreckage was located, no emergency signals received. Yet that same week, British monitoring stations in Northumberland intercepted anomalous bursts on a NATO frequency designated for classified maritime communications. The signals came in clusters of 5 tones, each separated by precise 5-second intervals. Decoders initially believed it to be background noise until a pattern emerged. The sequence corresponded to a series of coordinates. When plotted, they formed a curved line tracing the exact route of K-43's last known course. The Royal Navy's intelligence branch, then operating out of GCHQ Scarborough, flagged the intercept as origin unknown, probable Soviet source. Decrypted transcripts released decades later included a chilling annotation from an unnamed analyst. Transmission appears self-referential, as if from within the echo. The coordinates led to a deep trench north of Gotland known as Sector 12 Delta, an area notorious among sonar operators for unpredictable readings. Swedish naval archives describe the same anomaly in their logs. A stationary echo, metallic in tone, responsive to pings, yet without any motion. By the end of 1952, both the Swedes and the British had quietly ceased sonar operations in that zone. Within Soviet ranks, the loss of K-43 became a subject of suspicion. An internal report to the Navy Commissariat accused the Baltic Fleet's technical division of procedural sabotage. 3 officers were reassigned to remote Arctic outposts. A month later, an NKVD memo, File 18742B, referenced unauthorized contact with unknown maritime structure. No details followed. Historians examining that file noticed a phrase handwritten in the margin, "Не двигается," no sly shit. It does not move, but it listens. Fishermen from the coast of Estonia began reporting strange sounds over the following summer. They spoke of a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from below the waves. A steady thrum felt through the hull rather than heard. In 1954, a Soviet research trawler recorded low-frequency vibrations in the same region. Its captain, Pavel Denikin, later defected and testified in Sweden that his sonar operator saw something vast on the scope, like a wall, but the signal bounced back wrong, as if the sea itself answered. The Soviet Union classified all related hydroacoustic data under Project Ulysses, a research program on oceanic anomalies. The name resurfaced decades later in American declassification records, suggesting a shared awareness between both superpowers. By 1958, a classified US Navy report, Baltic Sector Surveillance Assessment, mentioned Soviet salvage activity in the trench near Gotland. Submarine cables had been laid across the area, though no civilian purpose was listed. The report speculated on possible undersea installation, but subsequent reconnaissance by NATO divers was inconclusive. The seabed there was treacherous, riddled with wrecks, munitions, and deep silt. Yet one diver's personal log, recovered after his death in 1982, contained a cryptic line: "Found hull plating with serial K-43, but no seams. It was as if the metal had grown together." In 1989, fragments attributed to the K-43 hull surfaced near Kaliningrad during dredging operations. Metallurgical analysis revealed an alloy composition not recorded in any Soviet naval blueprint until years later. It resisted oxidation and exhibited magnetic properties inconsistent with standard submarine construction. The discovery was quickly seized by military authorities, and the research team was instructed to surrender all photographs and samples. One engineer, writing anonymously in a Polish journal, claimed the material hummed faintly under electrical contact. He was dismissed within the month. After the fall of the Soviet Union, researchers finally gained access to partial archives from the Baltic Fleet Command. Inside one of the recovered file cabinets was a torn inventory sheet listing acoustic device, type 7K Delta, origin, recovered. The entry was followed by a single line of redacted text, but beneath it, faint impressions from the typewriter ribbon spelled source foreign object. Another file referenced the Murmansk Institute for Experimental Communications, which briefly existed in the early 1950s before disappearing from records. Its lead scientist, Dr. Yuri Malkin, specialized in long-range underwater resonance, the study of sound as a medium for data transfer. He vanished in 1953. Western intelligence too had fragments of the story. A declassified CIA cable from 1960 cited continued Soviet interest in undersea acoustic anomalies in the Baltic. The memo concluded with the note, possible relic of German wartime installation, unknown purpose. That theory traced back to rumors of an unfinished Nazi undersea station known as Basis Ostoy, allegedly constructed near Gotland in 1944 to test radar countermeasures. If K-43 was sent to retrieve remnants of that installation, it may have found more than it was prepared for. A British naval historian, Dr. Leonard Mayers, proposed in 1995 that K-43 might have encountered one of the submerged magnetic mines laid by the Germans at the end of the war, detonated decades later by corrosion. But the lack of debris and the odd radio signals contradict that explanation. Mayer's own archival notes, published posthumously, mention correspondence with a retired Swedish sonar technician who described a station under the sea, one that still responds. The technician's name was redacted, but his letter closed with a single line. It answers in the same voice every time. Today, the location designated Sector 12 Delta remains restricted to civilian research vessels. Swedish Maritime Authority records cite environmental hazards as the reason, yet satellite tracking data shows periodic visits by unmarked ships with military transponders. Divers who have ventured too close report interference with their instruments, erratic compass behavior, and inexplicable electrical discharge along metal surfaces. Some describe hearing faint rhythmic knocking through the hull, slow, deliberate, as though returning a call. The most disturbing evidence surfaced in 2014, when the digital release of old GCHQ files revealed a series of encrypted messages logged between April and May 1952. Each message consisted of repeating bursts lasting 43 seconds, alternating between low and high tones. The final entry in the transcript contained one English word embedded in Morse, alive. The source location was listed as 57°14N, 19°47E, the same coordinates as Sector 12 Delta. The Soviet government never acknowledged the recovery of K-43, nor did they publicly reopen the case. Its official fate remains lost due to flooding. Yet fragments of its story persist in declassified references and seamen's tales, of a submarine that went silent but not still, of a signal that continued long after its transmitter should have been cold. Some claim K-43 lies fused to something on the seabed, a relic older than the war itself. Others believe it was the first victim of a technology neither side understood, one hidden since the last days of the Reich beneath layers of salt and secrecy. Whatever truth rests beneath those frozen waters has never stopped transmitting. The question is not whether K-43 sent its final signal, but who or what has been answering ever since. Chapter 3: The Nuremberg Black Files. When the war ended in 1945, Allied troops seized not just weapons and laboratories, but paper, tons of it. From bunkers in Berlin, salt mines in Thuringia, and bombed-out ministries came crates marked Reichskanzlei and Geheime Reichssache. Most were catalogued, photographed, and filed for use in the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. Yet among these archives was a smaller shipment of documents, loaded onto a US Army transport truck in May 1945 and sent toward the Palace of Justice. The manifest listed them as political economic records, batch E77. They never arrived. Within months, rumors spread among the legal clerks. A missing set of papers containing evidence too compromising for public trial. Some said it detailed pre-war contracts between German conglomerates and American banks. Others claimed it exposed covert Allied operations that had quietly mirrored the Reich's own crimes. In later intelligence memos, the set became known as the Black Files. Its fate was quietly sealed when General Lucius Clay ordered several sensitive record groups transferred to US custody pending classification review. What was meant as temporary became permanent. The files were never entered into the Nuremberg Evidence Archive. The first public hint of their existence came in 1961, when a retired OSS archivist named Frederick Hansen submitted a Freedom of Information request for a file code he had once handled. Eclipse Rev 46, the request was denied. Hansen later told a journalist he'd been warned by former colleagues not to go digging into Eclipse material. Operation Eclipse, officially, was the Allied plan for post-war occupation of Germany, but Eclipse Revisited, referenced in Hansen's denied file, did not appear in any official record. An unmarked folder discovered in 1978 at the US National Archives provided the first physical trace. Inside were 3 documents: a memo from Major Robert K. Andrews to the Chief of Intelligence, dated 12th July 1946, a half-burned telegram marked Eyes Only, Berlin Station, and a list of names with the header Special Advisory Committee, Phase 2. The telegram read simply, "Proceed with Eclipse Revisited under directive of Joint Allied Command. Tribunal remains unaware." Andrews's memo referenced a sealed hearing conducted off-site from Nuremberg, attended by representatives from the US, UK, and Soviet delegations. There was no transcript, no record of verdicts, only a handwritten note at the bottom. Immunity approved for technical contribution to ongoing operations. The implication was chilling. The Allies, while prosecuting Nazi crimes, were simultaneously negotiating leniency for figures involved in research useful to emerging Cold War agendas. The names partially visible on the burned list, von Ardenne, Gerlach, Blome, were all scientists or administrators later recruited under Operation Paperclip or Soviet equivalents. A missing paragraph hinted at foreign corporate intermediaries ensuring post-war continuity of supply. The memo's classification level, top secret alpha, black, matched that used for nuclear weapons documentation. In 1987, German historian Dieter Reinhardt stumbled upon another reference while examining declassified US Treasury papers. A letter from the Office of Military Government, dated January 1947, mentioned sealed German financial records retained under Directive Eclipse Revisited. It bore the initials JDR, possibly John D. Rockefeller Jr., whose foundation had funded parts of the economic restructuring in post-war Europe. When Reinhardt published his findings, the US government neither confirmed nor denied the existence of the files. Within a year, his research grant was withdrawn, and his notes were seized by customs during travel to Washington. They were never returned. Soviet archives offer a parallel thread. In a 1951 KGB summary report labeled Delo 93 Char, analysts referenced Western suppression of German war economic data for post-war integration. The report attached a fragment of a microfilm recovered from an Allied convoy outside Frankfurt. It contained ledgers listing transactions between German chemical firms and neutral countries through 1944, evidence of trade routes maintained in violation of embargoes. Marginalia in Cyrillic read, "Proof of capitalist complicity in Reich's survival networks." The microfilm's origin file was designated black, though Soviet catalogers did not understand the codename's Western context. A 1993 investigative program by a BBC journalist, Helen Crawford, reignited public interest when she broadcast an interview with a former US Army clerk stationed in Nuremberg. The clerk, James Alderton, claimed he had personally seen the crates marked E77. He described black wax seals stamped with an unfamiliar insignia, an eagle encircled not by a swastika, but by a 5-pointed star. They weren't court exhibits, Alderton said. They were something else. They came with guards. When asked what became of them, he replied, "Loaded onto a C-47 bound for Frankfurt. After that, nothing." In 2001, portions of the CIA's digital reading room briefly displayed a redacted entry labeled Black Files, Post-War Economic Adjustments, Eclipse. Within hours, the entry was removed. Web archives captured enough to confirm the existence of a project active from 1946 to 1948, involving interrogation and transfer of Axis economic personnel. The removal sparked renewed speculation. Had the files contained the blueprint for Western economic reconstruction, drafted by the very men who financed the Reich? Evidence of suppression continued. A 2010 document leak from the German Foreign Office contained an internal email discussing public relations risk of renewed inquiries into E-77 material. The attached briefing noted, US retains primary custodianship under 1947 bilateral secrecy agreement. In response, researchers traced the agreement to a meeting held in Frankfurt between General William Draper and representatives of IG Farben's successor corporations, BASF, Bayer, and Höchst. The minutes of that meeting remain classified, but a post-war memo refers cryptically to settlement terms aligned with Eclipse review findings. What the black files truly contained remains speculation. Some historians believe they were evidence of corporate complicity, blueprints for how war economies were absorbed into post-war democracies. Others suspect something darker, the concealment of Allied involvement in early biological or psychological warfare experiments inherited from the Reich. Fragments of correspondence between US Army Medical Corps and captured Nazi physicians lend weight to the theory. One 1947 letter from Camp King, Germany, mentions prior agreements from Eclipse Review protecting contributors from prosecution. Today, the Nuremberg Palace of Justice still holds only sanitized versions of trial evidence. Every so often, a mislabeled folder surfaces, its pages marked with non-standard codes, its corners burned. Each time, they are quickly reclassified. The physical crates marked E-77 have never resurfaced. Yet, in a 2016 audit of the US National Archives' Special Access holdings, an entry was noted and then deleted within 48 hours. Real number 3347, category Black, Eclipse Revisited, 1946, Berlin Station. The deletion was logged under external diplomatic request. If there is truth in the legend of the Black Files, it is this. History's clean lines were drawn with the ink of omission. Every tribunal requires a witness, every judgment a curtain. The Allies exposed the crimes of the Reich to define moral victory. But somewhere in the sealed corridors of 1946, another trial occurred, one not meant for history books. The evidence was not destroyed. It was archived under another name, another purpose. For 70 years, that archive has remained locked behind layers of classification. Those who have tried to access it describe a pattern, a polite deferral, a reference to security review, and finally, silence. The same silence that fills the missing pages of the Nuremberg Black Files. A silence that speaks not of ignorance, but of deliberate erasure. And as the Cold War deepened, that silence became policy. Truth, like evidence, could be contained. Chapter 4. Operation Iron Cathedral. In the spring of 1950, a Soviet construction team clearing rubble from Warsaw's Old Town unearthed something unexpected. Beneath the ruins of a bomb tram depot lay a reinforced concrete shaft leading downward into blackness. The foreman, a veteran of the front named Mikhail Stepanovich, noted the walls were lined with copper conduits embedded in the concrete, an anomaly in post-war Poland, where copper was a scarce and heavily rationed material. The following day, an NKVD detachment arrived and sealed the site. Their report, declassified only in fragments, gave it a name: Object 12, Żelazny Sobor, or Iron Cathedral. To the public, Warsaw's reconstruction continued unhindered. To the Soviet command, the discovery triggered alarm. Engineers identified the site as pre-war German construction, possibly late 1944, consistent with Ahnenerbe engineering blueprints recovered in Lower Silesia. Those plans mentioned Energetische Versuchsanlage W, an experimental energy installation supposedly abandoned as the Red Army advanced. The design was strange, towering coil assemblies arranged around a central column, their geometry reminiscent not of power generation but of resonance tuning. A technical officer wrote, "It hums when the air pressure changes." A classified memorandum, dated 9 April 1950 from Colonel Alexander Golovin to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, confirmed the finding of mechanical electrical devices of non-standard configuration. Attached sketches depicted concentric rings of wire, coils leading toward a sealed chamber marked Hauptkern, Zugang verboten. Inside, investigators found charred remains of electrical cabling fused to the walls and a shattered glass sphere 1 meter in diameter. The walls bore German inscriptions referencing Feldstärke, field strength, and Resonanzproben, resonance tests. Golovin's final line read simply, "Recommend total containment, potential hazardous emissions." By early 1951, The installation was under control of the NKVD's 9th Department, tasked with securing enemy technological remnants. Files from the same period show that Soviet physicists from Leningrad were transferred to Warsaw under orders to conduct structural and magnetic analysis. The lead scientist, Dr. Viktor Brukhanov, specialized in electromagnetic interference and acoustic resonance. His first progress report, later recovered by Polish historians, describes localized fluctuations in the surrounding field, comparable to low-frequency induction. In other words, the buried complex was still active. Locals noticed phenomena as well. Residents living near Miodowa Street reported compasses spinning erratically and street lamps flickering without power surges. The Polish State Security Service, UB, recorded multiple complaints, but dismissed them as electrical instability from reconstruction works. Yet nighttime patrols mentioned faint vibrations underfoot, rhythmic like the throb of distant machinery. A Polish technician attached to the Soviet team later confided to his wife that the air hums down there, like a church organ that never stops. The codename Operation Iron Cathedral appeared in NKVD correspondence by late 1951, designating both the site and a parallel research effort. Western intelligence first caught wind of it in 1954 when intercepted. Soviet transmissions mentioned subject cathedral resonance yield tests. The CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence classified the information as probable weaponization study, though no direct evidence of experimentation was found. NATO analysts speculated it could be a relic of Nazi radio wave research or an early attempt at electromagnetic area denial. Unconfirmed rumors suggested it had been designed to disrupt communications across entire districts. A declassified Polish Ministry of Defense report from 1962 sheds light on the excavation's deeper levels. Engineers mapped a central hall, 30 meters across, supported by copper pillars coated in black residue. The floor was marked by symmetrical burns radiating from the center, as if from a massive electrical discharge. At the heart of the room lay a rusted steel sphere, split open like a cracked egg. Within, fragments of quartz and traces of mercury were discovered, suggesting the use of some form of high-voltage capacitive storage. The document notes that one worker collapsed from acute disorientation and temporary blindness. He described seeing the walls pulse like they were breathing. After that incident, the site was sealed again. Soviet authorities claimed contamination and declared the area structurally unsound. However, satellite photos from US reconnaissance missions in the 1960s show construction activity continuing at the coordinates. What had begun as containment had evolved into expansion. New ventilation shafts appeared, along with transmission lines connecting to Warsaw's grid. The justification, according to Warsaw Pact energy planning documents, was experimental load stabilization. Engineers, interviewed decades later, privately admitted they had been ordered to connect municipal lines to unknown facilities under Russian supervision. By the late 1970s, Iron Cathedral was a myth whispered among electrical workers and architecture students. Some claimed to hear vibrations through the concrete of the rebuilt old town when the power grid surged. In 1984, Polish dissident engineers smuggled out copies of maintenance schematics showing an unexplained substation labeled Unit 7, Resonant Reserve. It was located exactly above the sealed wartime tunnels. The documents made their way to the West, but were dismissed as Cold War disinformation. In 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a joint Polish-Russian historical commission briefly reopened the archives. Among the materials was a 1953 technical dossier authored by Dr. Brukhanov. It detailed the installation's operational phase between 1944 and 1945. Under the supervision of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, the same figure associated with the secret convoy of Operation Wintermute. Brukhanov's translated note reads, "The Germans attempted to generate oscillating magnetic fields to induce resonance in structural materials, potentially for wide-area sabotage. Power draw suggests capacity exceeding Warsaw's pre-war supply network." The document ends with an ominous addendum. Residual activity persists, source unknown. Researchers attempting to locate the exact coordinates in the 2000s encountered unexpected obstacles. Official city plans omit any reference to subsurface infrastructure beneath the area. When an academic team from Warsaw University of Technology applied for an excavation permit in 2004, they were denied access under national security provisions related to legacy Installations still monitored by the Ministry of Defense. Subsequent attempts to use ground-penetrating radar yielded faint but distinct geometric patterns beneath the street grid, perfect circles overlapping like ripples frozen in stone. Eyewitnesses to the last Soviet withdrawal in 1992 recalled trucks hauling heavy crates out of the district at night. One former driver, interviewed anonymously in 2010, described escorting sealed metallic drums that gave off heat even though they weren't plugged to anything. He claimed that convoy's route was diverted from the military depot to an airfield outside Minsk Mazowiecki. No official record confirms that transport. Today, the tunnels remain inaccessible. Periodically, maintenance crews report equipment failure and compass deviation near the site. In 2017, an unexplained power surge shut down a portion of Warsaw's grid for 6 minutes. Sensors recorded a spike in electromagnetic flux emanating from beneath the old town, the same coordinates as Object 12. The government attributed the blackout to aging cables. Locals, however, spoke again of that hum, a low resonance rising from the ground, steady and mournful, like the echo of a buried cathedral made of metal and current. Operation Iron Cathedral stands as one of the Cold War's quiet enigmas, a convergence of Nazi ambition and Soviet secrecy buried under the foundations of a city rebuilt from ashes. Its architecture was no church, yet its effect on those who entered was said to inspire awe and dread in equal measure. Whether it was a failed experiment, a prototype for electromagnetic warfare, or something still operating beyond human oversight, remains uncertain. What is certain is that 75 years after its construction, the Iron Cathedral still sings below Warsaw, its hymn unheard by those who live above it, yet persistent, unwavering, and waiting. Chapter 5. The Murmansk Accord. In April 1947, 2 years after the war's end, the Arctic port of Murmansk was a wasteland of twisted cranes, half-sunken freighters, and rusting tanks frozen into the ice. Officially, it was closed to foreigners, a quarantine zone for decontamination and ship salvage. Yet on the night of April 11th, under cover of a blizzard, an unmarked Douglas C-54 transport bearing faded US Army insignia landed at the Kola airfield. Its flight manifest listed meteorological equipment. The reality was far less mundane. The passengers were not weather technicians, but intelligence officers from both sides of a divided world. Representatives of the newly formed CIA and their Soviet counterparts of the MGB. The meeting they held would later be known, in whispers and redacted reports, as the Murmansk Accord. Post-war Europe was still sorting the spoils of Hitler's science. Across occupied Germany, Allied and Soviet teams scoured laboratories, bunkers, and mountain caves for anything of military or technological value. Kammler's secret programs, V2 blueprints, nuclear prototypes, all were prizes in a hidden arms race. But by 1947, another rumor began to circulate that along Norway's northern coast, near abandoned German outposts at Alta and Banak, a cache of materials had been discovered. Metallic fragments, documents in a cipher neither side could break, and the remains of a research project so compartmentalized that even the Reich's own scientists had only heard it spoken of as Project Morgenrot or Project Dawn. Whatever it was, both superpowers wanted it. Neither could afford a confrontation over it. Thus, the meeting in Murmansk. According to a surviving Soviet airfield log, the American delegation was led by Colonel Henry D. Wexler, attached to the Office of Policy Coordination. His opposite was Colonel Alexei Rudenkov, an MGB officer previously stationed in Berlin. The official agenda, as later reconstructed from declassified fragments, was the exchange and neutralization of hazardous technical archives. The Soviets would hand over part of the Morgenrot materials, recovered from Norway's Finnmark region in return for access to captured German industrial experts being held in the US occupation zone. No official treaty was signed. The agreement existed only as a verbal understanding, sealed in vodka and frost. Eyewitness accounts were scarce, but consistent. A Murmansk harbor worker recalled seeing 3 heavy trucks escorted by soldiers with no markings drive toward a hangar near the frozen docks. The cargo was stored in sealed wooden crates banded with lead. One crate was dropped during unloading, splitting a corner. The worker claimed to have glimpsed an object inside, something like a curved metal plate, mirror-bright despite the grime. When his story reached the NKVD weeks later, he was detained and never seen again. Documents later uncovered in the US National Archives provide a faint echo of the event. A memo dated 23 April 1947 from Major Robert T. Ellis to Director Hillenkoetter of the CIA refers to successful conclusion of Arctic transfer, materials under Project Severance. The memo includes a warning: technological content incompletely understood. Source implies atmospheric experimentation of unknown magnitude. Recommend containment. A second line, nearly illegible, reads, negotiation ensured continued Soviet silence, Moyne redacted. The memo was classified for 70 years. The Soviets kept their side equally secret. An internal MGB summary labeled Murmansk Protocol described a meeting of convenience with Western intelligence concerning the disposal of enemy scientific material. A marginal note in Rudenkoff's handwriting stated, Americans agreed to shared study under separate jurisdiction. No acknowledgement in print. After 1948, the term Murmansk Accord appears repeatedly in Soviet correspondence as a reference point for future cooperation in Arctic surveillance operations. The files were reclassified in 1962 under the heading Arctica 12 Phase, then vanished from public record. There are indications that whatever exchanged hands did not stay in storage. Declassified weather monitoring data from the region recorded unexplained atmospheric disturbances over the Barents Coast in late April 1947, radiostatic, compass errors, and a sharp drop in ionospheric readings. Norwegian fishermen reported lights without source flickering above the water near Nordkapp. A British intelligence assessment from 1950, Soviet Arctic anomalies noted similar events and cautiously suggested post-war continuation of German upper atmosphere experimentation. The document was marked, restricted, and never followed up. Curious footnote appears in the OSS's successor archives. In 1952, a joint US-Canadian weather balloon mission recorded metallic debris falling into the sea near Bear Island. The fragments retrieved bore inscriptions in German technical shorthand: Abt, Morgenrot, Prüfling D, and serial numbers dating to early 1945. The material was non-magnetic and showed no signs of corrosion. A CIA physicist analyzing the fragments remarked, composition inconsistent with known alloys, behaves under induction as if phase shifted. The fragments were sent to a facility in Maryland and never seen again. By the mid-1950s, Arctic command posts from both NATO and the USSR were quietly established along the same latitudes as the supposed exchange zone. Their stated mission was to monitor weather and polar navigation. In practice, both sides were watching each other, and something else. Declassified satellite reconnaissance from the 1960s identified a persistent magnetic anomaly under the Barents Sea shelf. The coordinates match those from the original Murmansk Accord memos. In 1974, a retired Soviet scientist named Oleg Kuryatov, who had worked at a research station near Arkhangelsk, gave an interview to a Finnish journalist. He claimed that the Accord had included not only documents, but physical devices, small, sealed spheres of unknown metal recovered from a collapsed German testing site in Norway. He described them as energy containers, inert until exposed to extreme cold. They were afraid of them, he said. They made a deal because neither side knew what would happen if they kept them. Kuryatov died in a car crash 3 weeks later. Modern historians attempting to verify Kuryatov's story found fragments of corroboration. In 2011, a Russian naval museum in Murmansk catalogued an unmarked steel crate discovered in a decommissioned storage hangar. Inside were weathered American stencils reading, "Return to Wright Field, property of US Army Air Forces." The crate was empty, but attached to its side was a paper tag stamped, "Murmansk consignment, April 1947. The artifact disappeared into private custody before independent verification could be completed." To this day, the Murmansk Accord remains one of the few documented instances of secret cooperation between American and Soviet intelligence during the early Cold War. What began as a pragmatic exchange may have become something larger, a shared effort to suppress a discovery that neither side could safely exploit. Every mention of the Accord ends the same way, in redaction, silence, or missing records. In 2019, a declassified CIA training document used the case as a cautionary example for new officers. It read, Murmansk demonstrates that information control is sometimes more stabilizing than knowledge acquisition. Certain archives are suppressed not to hide guilt, but to preserve equilibrium. The note was unsigned, but below it, in pen, someone had scrawled, "The North remembers. Keep it buried." Whether that phrase was a sardonic joke or a fragment of an original transmission from 1947 remains uncertain. The coordinates referenced in those early documents, 71°, 33°, lie beneath the Barents Sea, under 200 meters of ice and salt. No expedition has successfully reached the exact site. Russian maritime authorities continue to list it as a restricted zone due to seabed instability. Yet satellites still record faint electromagnetic fluctuations from that region each spring, around the anniversary of the original meeting. Perhaps it is nothing. Or perhaps, somewhere beneath the frozen Arctic, what began as an exchange of secrets has become a shared silence, an agreement written not in ink, but in fear. The Murmansk Accord was never signed, never ratified, never spoken of in official histories. But its shadow lingers in every classified archive, in every unexplained anomaly, in the quiet understanding between old adversaries. Some technologies are not trophies, they are warnings. As the last files are sealed and the last witnesses pass away, the fragments that remain, Wintermute, Ebon Cross, Silent Vectors, Iron Cathedral, the Murmansk Accord, form a mosaic of unease, each event isolated, yet bound by the same invisible current, a war that refused to die. Across Europe, cities rebuilt on foundations of secrecy still hum with the residue of what was buried beneath. The victors claimed history, but the shadows claimed the truth, and somewhere, in locked archives or beneath frozen soil, the unanswered transmissions of 1945 continue to whisper across time, proof that the Second World War may have ended on paper, but its ghosts are still transmitting, waiting for someone to listen.